June 6, 1950. And the Beringers had purchased the farm adjacent to our farm shortly before then.
Oh, that same year, yeah.
Same year. And Danny was born on June 8, 1950. And back then, of course, at Memorial Hospital, they kept the babies in there for a few days. And what we're told, it was alphabetized. We had Beringer, Bomke next to one another. So I've known the Beringers a long time. Anyway, anytime I speak, I remind myself of a story that my good friend, former Representative Rich Brower, once told me. Apparently, he was speaking at an ABATE organization's monthly meeting. I don't know if you know what ABATE is, but it's a motorcycle organization. And unlike many organizations, when they have a monthly meeting, they may have 10 or 15 people there. Well, ABATE will have anywhere from 100 to 200, particularly during the winter. And it's more like a happy hour than a meeting. They like their beer. And anyways, the night wore on, the president walked up to the podium, took the microphone, and introduced Rich Brower, Representative Brower. He walks up, gets the microphone, looks out over the crowd, and they didn't look all that happy. And he said, "How many of you want to hear me speak tonight?" And he said, "About 1 or 2 hands went up in the air." And he said, I turned around, gave the microphone back to the president, walked off the podium. I'll be darned if they didn't give me a standing ovation. So David asked me to talk about growing up on the farm and my business and political experience, and I'm going to do that in about 30 minutes. Not in 30 minutes, a total of 30 minutes.
Oh, 30.
Yeah. I did grow up on a farm, west of Springfield, as David mentioned, and my parents contributed to the success I had in both business and politics, as most parents do. My father taught me good work ethic. You know, as a farm boy, you gotta work. That's just the expectation. And my mother taught me you never quit once you start something, and you find a way to do better. I started operating farm equipment at a young age. At about 7, I was raking hay in front of a baler. So it was pretty young. Of course, tractors back then were equivalent to garden tractors today. But then I progressed to mulching, disking, plowing, cultivating. When I was in the 8th grade, 13 years of age, my father suffered a serious illness and had to be hospitalized in the spring when the spring plowing had to be done. So it was up to me, the 8th grader, to do it. Get home from school on the school bus, go out to the fields, work till midnight, and I did that every day until the plowing was completed. When I was in the 9th grade, I found that I was pretty good distance runner. I could beat anybody at Plains, any senior, anyone. I was pretty darn good at it. I was the #1 cross-country runner for Pleasant Plains. Problem was, I don't think I could beat any #1 runners from any other school. And as a matter of fact, we had a multi-county conference out at the state fairgrounds every year. Now back then, you didn't have the multiple classes you have today, 1A, 2A, 3A, 4A. There was just one class. So Plains competed with Chicago schools, East St. Louis schools, Springfield schools, one class. So we had this multi-county conference, about 200 runners. As a freshman, I finished something like 30th, which was respectable, but it wasn't great. And I didn't get paid while working on the farm. There was not an expectation of getting paid. That's just what you did. So I earned money during the summer, and my summer job between my freshman year and sophomore year was baling hay, working for a custom baler, bucking bales we called it. So I thought, what I will do this summer, I'm going to get an exceptional condition for cross country in the fall. So I would buck bales all day, come home, run 3.5 miles, go to Beringer's Pond, swim laps, it was across the field from us, swim laps, come home, and work out with weights. I did that all summer. When school started, I had second thoughts. You know, I'm really not that good at this cross-country stuff. I'm not sure I want to do it. So I informed my mother that I was not going to participate that year. Well, she informed me I was. And she said, you don't start something without finishing it. Furthermore, you're good at it. You're going to find a way to work even harder. You're going to do well. And she said, furthermore, I paid $5 for a pair of cross-country shoes for you. So you're going to run, and you're going to run fast. Anyway, cross-country started. Before cross-country started, I thought, now what can I do that other kids don't do? And I decided that I would get up every morning, 5 to 5:30, and run 3.5 miles before I went to school. We always worked out after school, but I would run 3.5 miles before I even went to school. Get home, shower, eat breakfast, get on the school bus, go to school. And I vividly remember the first cross-country meet that year was at New Berlin High School. And when you ran against the smaller schools, the race was always on a township road. It's 2 miles long. Today it's 3 miles. Back then it was 2 miles long. But when you ran against the larger schools, it's either a golf course or a park. Well, this was at New Berlin, so it was a township road. Coaches would start you when we would start, filing or getting in single file. They go around us, get to the end of or where the finish line was, and wait for us to get there. When I finished that race, I was surprised to turn around and nobody was within a quarter of a mile. The next week, we went to Chatham-Glenwood, the same results. I would go on to win virtually every race I would run in over the next 3 years, including that race out at the state fairgrounds. Sophomore, junior, and senior year, and to my knowledge, no one has ever achieved that. I even remember my times, David.
Oh my!
As a sophomore, my winning time was 9 minutes, 29 seconds. As a junior, 9 minutes, 34 seconds. And as a senior, 9 minutes, 16 seconds.
My best was 17:42. But we were running a little over 2 miles.
Yeah. So anyway, lost my train of thought. So then, when I turned 19, my father passed away unexpectedly. And I was really kind of confused. I didn't know what to do. Should I continue my college education? What should I do? Well, my dad had retired from farming the year before, and he got a job with the state of Illinois as an equipment operator for the state highway department. And so I got a call, and I was offered his position. Well, that was a no-brainer. It paid really well. I'm operating equipment. I like operating equipment. So I thought, that's what I'm going to do. And I did. And I really enjoyed it. But I knew I wanted something more. I always liked politics. Politics was something that we discussed around the dinner table. When in college, I was the chairman for Nixon Agnew. It's something that I really enjoy, but I wanted to emulate my uncle Clarence Neff. No relation to my partner, Lynn Neff.
Oh, really?
It's my mother's brother. Clarence was an entrepreneur. He had a couple of successful businesses. He was president of the bank in Stronghurst, Illinois, and he was a state representative for 20 years. I thought that's the way to do it. Have a business you can build up, and then run for office. If things don't work out, you always have your business to fall back on. When I turned 21, I was still working for the state. Enos Tolan, who was a county auditor, asked me to manage his re-election campaign. At the same time, I ran for precinct committeeman. Now, the significance here, as we all know, you had to be 21 to vote back then. So the first time I voted, I got to vote for myself. The guy I was running against was well known. He was a successful farmer. He had taken over the precinct committeeman from my father when he passed away. And the guy had been on the school board for several years, president of the school board. So I decided, what can I do different? Again, back to my mother. I got to do something that he won't do. I'm going to go to every house in the precinct, every Republican. I'm not just going to give them a flyer, but I'm going to visit with them. So I did that. My opponent did not do that. He probably thought, why should I do that? It's probably not necessary. I'm running against some damn 21-year-old kid. It isn't necessary. I would win that election by 2 to 1. Then at 23, it was time for me to leave the state of Illinois and start my business career. That's when I started with Country Companies Insurance as an insurance agent. At 25, the county board seat where I lived became vacant, and a very popular Democrat had won by large margins 2 elections in a row. Since he was a Democrat resigning, they had to appoint another Democrat, and I was a Republican. They appointed a person to take his place, but he would have to stand for election in November. And I was nominated to run against him. And I thought, now how am I going to win this? It's not a good time to be a Republican. It was 2 years after Watergate. We all know what happened then, when a Republican president resigned in disgrace. It was not a good time to run as a Republican. As a matter of fact, they had brochures printed up that did not have Republican on it. I didn't want to turn people off before they read about me. So I didn't want Republican on that brochure. But I decided, again, I'm going to work harder than my opponent. I'm going to go to every house in the district. Now, anybody that knows anything about precincts, it was 5 townships: Loami, New Berlin, Island Grove, Cartwright, and Gardner Townships, 6 precincts. Anybody who knows anything about precincts knows, well, that's no big deal. 6 precincts. In Springfield, it isn't. You walk down one side of the street and up the other. But in a rural area, there were more homes outside of Loami, New Berlin, Pleasant Plains than were in those communities. And they were spread miles apart. So it wasn't a matter of walking door to door. It was a matter of driving your car 1 or 2 miles to the next house. Now, again, I'm a Republican running in a very conservative district where a Democrat had won by large margins 2 elections in a row, and I'm 25 years old, I'm single. You know the kind of car I drove? A Corvette. Now, that doesn't have the makings for a good outcome, but I did it, and I won every precinct. I had people come to me years later say, hey, I voted for you on the county board. I remember you coming to me in that Corvette. Anyway, how things happen. The next day, I walk into my insurance office, and I didn't know the staff knew how important this election was to me. You know, to me, it was an election, but they had made placards, they had decorated my desk in the insurance office, and they had made a cake, and I was feeling pretty good. And I'm standing behind my desk when the agency manager walks into the room. I think we're having pie and talking. And the agency manager back then gave out 2 trophies a month. One for the most productive agent of the month, and one for the least productive agent of the month. But it wasn't a trophy, it was some ugly bucket. In 7 years I worked for country companies. Only 1 month did I have the least production, and it was a month before that election. And he comes walking in, doesn't say anything, plops it down on my decorated desk, walks out with a smile on his face. Kind of spoiled the mood. Everybody kind of went back to their desk, and you know, he's the boss. But it sent a message. I knew that if I wanted to move up on the county board, if I wanted to run for another office, probably he would not tolerate it. So I probably would have to make a change. The next year, in 1977, the best thing would happen to me. Sally Jo would marry me on July 30th, 1977. Now I remember that year so well, David, because I bought my last Corvette in 1977, a month before the election, or before we got married.
Did you make him sell it?
No. That's the reason I'm married. Because he pulled up in a Corvette.
I would have gotten a vote, maybe. Anyway, so that was 1977. So anyway, I told Sally, I have this one goal. I want to become a private pilot. I've always wanted to be a private pilot. I'm going to set a time period. I'm going to do it in 6 months. So I started in April. In June of that year, I was soloing, self-studied for the written test, completed that, and then in October became a private pilot, passed my exam to become a private pilot. My whole purpose of telling you that is setting goals and sticking to them in the timetable to complete your goal. So in 1980, it was time for me to move on from country companies, so I merged with a gentleman who had an independent agency. We were partners, but we really weren't. We were just sharing office expenses. A percentage of our commission went for the expenses. Now the problem was, I went from a very good salary at country companies to 0. No guarantee of any money coming in. My objective was to try to rewrite as many clients as I could from country companies. You want to get that?
Go.
It's my phone, I don't know. I didn't turn mine on.
My objective, of course, was to try to rewrite as many clients as I had with country companies, with the multiple companies that I now represented. Back then, country companies didn't require agents to sign a non-compete clause, so it was perfectly legal for me to do that. Now, I'm told about a year after I left, agents had to sign a non-compete clause. I think I know why. Anyway, after 2 years, I get contacted by Lynn Neff of Iles Neff Insurance Agency, wanting to talk to me, wanting to have lunch. Wanted to ask me about coming in to be a partner with the Iles Neff Agency. He had gotten my name from an individual who had taken a class that I taught. When I was with country companies, I took several insurance courses. One of those was LUTC, Life Underwriting Training Council, and you could get certified if you took both courses. There were 2 courses. And after I completed, I think there were 10 weeks each. After I completed the course, the council asked me if I would teach it, and I did, and I actually thoroughly enjoyed it. The students were made up of insurance employees. There were a lot of regional offices in Springfield at the time, plus insurance agents. One of the individuals was a guy by the name of Kurt Van Etten, who had been in the class, highly recommended me to Lynn. That's why Lynn called me. I guess the rest is history. We became partners, and eventually Lynn and I would buy out HB Hollis and buy and renovate a building on South 6th Street. But back to when I merged in there, I became, for the first time in 10 years, I was earning a salary. It wasn't commission. We were a corporation, and I had a set salary plus profits. So then I could kind of take my focus off the insurance and kind of refocus again on politics. So back to the county board. I realized early on, if you want to understand how government works, you got to understand the financing. Where does the money come from? So I knew I had to be a member of the finance committee. So I went to Dick Austin, the chairman, asked him to appoint me, in which he would not for some reason. So I said, well, heck, I'll attend meetings anyway. So I started attending the finance committee meetings, and after a period of time, Pat Noonan, who was chairman of the finance committee, went to Dick Austin, chairman of the board, and said, we appoint Bomke to the committee. He's got a better attendance record than anyone, including me. And so he did. 2 years later, Dick Austin would resign as chairman of the county board. Pat Noonan would be elected chairman of the county board, and Pat Noonan would appoint me as chairman of the finance committee. 6 years later, Pat Noonan would resign. I would then be elected chairman of the Sangamon County Board. And then 2.5 years later, Kara Sarah, who was state senator, would run for mayor, get elected mayor, leaving her seat open in the Senate. And I was nominated or appointed to take her Senate seat. Now the problem I had was nobody knew me. Nobody knew Larry Bomke. It was not a well-known name, not a renowned name. I don't know if you're familiar with the Bomke patch. Everybody asks me if I'm related to people with the Bomke patch. There was no Bomke patch back then. Nobody knew Bomke. So I knew I had my work cut out for me. I had to go everywhere. It was a 3-county area, Sangamon, Menard, and Cass County. Later it became Sangamon, Menard, and Logan, but then it was Sangamon, Menard, and Cass County. So every day I would go to businesses introducing myself. I'd make every ham and bean dinner, chicken dinner, spaghetti dinner, chili dinner, I mean, you name it, we went to it. On the weekends, Sally Jo, me, Sally Jo, Wokar, our son, and our daughter Natalie, with our Bomke t-shirts, would go everywhere. If there was a garage sale, we were there. Wanted people to get to know Bomke. Well, I was never more offended than that year at the state fair opening. We always have a ribbon cutting at the state fair. And historically, or traditionally, the governor's there, the director of ag's there, the state fair manager's there, and all the dignitaries. Well, I had to be there. And I had things going on that day, so I had a staffer drop me off at the gate so I could cut the ribbon, get back in the car, and go on to whatever I needed to do. So he did that, I'm the only one with a suit on. Everybody else is dressed like you would if you're going to a fair. I didn't think anything of it till the next day. Are any of you familiar with the Capitol Facts? Maybe not. It's an insider paper, kind of tells what's going on, and Rich Miller writes it. Well, Rich Miller writes about the state fair ribbon cutting, and he said, and the stealth senator from Springfield, meaning that nobody ever saw me, the stealth senator from Springfield, Larry Bomke, shows up looking like an undertaker. Well, he was right about that, but I was offended by the stealth senator. I'm busting my rear end to get out, to get, so people know me. Anyway, then a few months later, I have an opponent. The gentleman who was appointed to run against me came from a well-known, renowned family, very well-known and prominent family here in Springfield. His uncle of the same name had been a state representative for several years, then became a circuit judge for London against the name. Became a circuit judge for several years. A very nice family, very prominent. He's a young attorney. I think I got my work cut out for me. What am I going to do? Back to my mother again. You got to find a way to work harder than the next guy. So I decided then and there I would start walking precincts in October. And I would do it for a year and a month. And I would do not one, but 3 precincts a week. Now, if any of you have done a precinct, you understand how big of an undertaking, an arduous task that is. It's huge. If you haven't, you don't know what I'm talking about, but it's big. 3 precincts a week. I'm going to do it. I'm determined to do it, and I started October 1st, and I did it. And I found that when people say in the winter is the worst time to campaign, I found it to be the best time, because I would start during the week at 5 o'clock, and people are home at 5 o'clock in the winter. It's dark. And I remember vividly being in Athens, Illinois on a Saturday afternoon with a wind chill factor of 40 below zero, knocking on doors. People remember you were there. I ran into Chuck Redpath, I don't know, Alderman Redpath, a few months ago, and he reminded me of something I'd forgotten. He said, that first time you ran, you stopped by my house twice. And I actually had forgotten that. I ran out of precincts. I was starting over again. And honestly, I'd forgotten that. But I truly believe the only reason I won that election is because of my efforts of knocking, because I didn't win by that much, knocking on doors. Nobody knew who I was, but I knocked on most of their doors. And it was estimated that I knocked on over 20,000 doors that election. My hand was sore. But that's the only way I would have won that election. I didn't stop, knocking on doors, but I didn't do it for a whole year. Elections after that would start in May and go to November. And I remember in 2004, something that maybe my parents helped me with, being compassionate, I don't know. But it was about the 3rd house I came to. It was in June. It was hot, I'm sweaty, and I walk up to the door, and on the side, on the mailbox, it has Marion Davis. So I knew who lived there. Knock on the door, Marion comes to the door, and I said, Marion? She said, yes, Senator Bomke, it's good to see you. Well, it's good to see you, Marion. How are you doing? I said, Senator Bomke, I feel so good. I am feeling so good, but I have cancer. But I think I feel good enough to mow my lawn tomorrow. And I said, oh, crud. Marion, do you have a lawnmower? I'm going to mow your lawn. I'm going to mow your lawn for you. What? I want to do it. I feel like I need to do it. It took me about an hour and 15 minutes. I get done. I'm sweaty. I got grass all over me. I'm thinking, if I go to another house, they're going to have me arrested. I can't continue like this. I just can't. So I thought, well, I'm going to call it a night. Maybe Marion will tell her neighbor that I was here. 2 days later, Toby McDaniels, the late Toby McDaniels, if you remember him, the articles he had, he wrote about me mowing Marion's lawn. I'm out knocking on doors, going door to door. Now, I to this day don't know how Toby found out about that. I think maybe Marion called him simply because Toby later told me that he had done several stories about Marion Davis. She was a remarkable woman. She and I became good friends. David, she was from England, like your mother.
Oh, and I remember Toby's story. I remember that. Oh, yeah.
Well, it gets maybe not better than that, but 2 months later, I'm sitting in my Capitol office, and Bill Brady comes in from Bloomington, Senator from Bloomington. He said, Larry, I'm on my way to the Capitol, and I'm listening to Paul Harvey. Do you know you're the rest of the story today? Oh, it's a ladies' lawn? I said, no, I didn't know that. And probably a year later, I was talking to a Kiwanis club, and a gentleman afterwards said, Senator Bomke, I was in Colorado, and I'm listening to Paul Harvey, and my state senator, Larry Bomke, was the rest of the story. So I think it's you might tell a neighbor, and the whole world knows. Okay. Anyway, so I guess the point of my stories here tonight is you got to work hard. You just have to work hard, and you have to have goals. You have to set goals, and never give up. And you have to have a burning desire when you want to do something. If you truly want to do it, you've got to have that burning desire to accomplish it. The other thing you got to remember: don't allow anyone to push you into something you don't want to do. Which reminds me. It brings me to the last story tonight. It's about a young man in Texas who got invited to this party given by this wealthy Texas billionaire. It seems that he had invited all the eligible bachelors in the area to his home to meet his daughter, who was of Marion age. And as the night wore on, as the saying goes, they were feeling no pain. He invited them to the back of his home to a Olympic-sized swimming pool in which he had the foresight to fill with water moccasins and alligators. And he said to the young man, if one of you will swim the length of this pool, I'll give you one of three things. Give you $1 million in cash. That's not enough incentive. You can have 1,000 acres, my very best land. That's not enough incentive. I'll give you the hand of my daughter. And if you don't already know it, she is my only heir, and she will inherit my fortune. No sooner were the words out of his mouth than his wife went in the pool, almost an immediate emergence at the other end. Texan ran down. This young man's dripping wet. He said, young man, you did it. What do you want? Do you want the $1 million in cash? No, sir. Do you want the 1,000 acres of my very best land? He said, no, sir. Well, young man, I've got to assume you want the hand of my daughter. He said, no, sir. He said, well, crying out loud, young man, what does he do want? He said, I want to know the name of the dude that pushed me in the swimming pool.
I got a couple of things. I'd like to touch on your beautiful wife, where you met her, and talk a little bit about Wolf and Natalie.
Yeah, okay. My wife I met selling insurance. Apparently the Corvette was appealing to her because I drove up. I was selling insurance to a roommate. And she can tell you the story. I don't know her roommate. You got to come out and see this guy or something. And she comes out and sees my car. All of a sudden she's interested. But that's where I met her. But I was engaged at the time. And I knew she wasn't the type of girl that would go out with somebody engaged. So it was a few months later, and the engagement was broken off, and I ran into Sally, and we started dating from that point.
And she's from Streeter, so I just assumed that you'd met her through Streeter, but
no, she was teaching at Chatham, and we go by our apartment after church every day. Cherry Hills we go, and their apartment, well, they burned down, but the complex is still there, a part of it. And Wolfgar, our son, is a deputy sheriff, and our daughter, Natalie, is an anchor for Fox News in Chicago.
I see her all the time.
Yeah.
Yep, to come up on Facebook or something, some story she's doing. So I'm really proud of her.
Yes.
Well, first of all, my husband and I are leaving tomorrow morning with 18 other Corvettes.
Well, you have appreciation for it.
Bowling Green, Kentucky.
Yeah, of course.
You know what that is,
Yes.
the plan and everything. I had Hollis and Knapp Insurance. I went Diamond Brothers now, you probably know who they are.
Yeah, well, what happened was we sold out to Diamond. Lynn and I were partners for almost 40 years. We sold out to Diamond Brothers.
Okay, I think I remember seeing you in the office one day
Yeah.
when I was in there. Now, first, do you still own the farm?
No.
No.
The only of the farm that's left is 4 acres that Sally Jo and I live on. It's not a farm, it's pasture. It's where we kept our hogs.
Okay, now as far as politics, Senator, I think I was in you said Capitol office, so you weren't in the Stratton building?
No,
Okay.
no, our offices, all the state senators' offices are in the Capitol.
I worked with the homeless for a few years, and some of us went to visit different senators and representatives. I remember being in your office, and I forgot what happened, but anyway.
I hope
this has
I
been
wasn't rude.
No, you're right. This has been several years ago.
Yeah.
But have you ever aspired to be like a U.S. senator or a governor of Illinois?
No, I had people approach me about running for governor.
I remember that, your name being
Yeah,
kicked around the
it's
governor.
locally here, where you live, people want you to run for, but again, I can't walk the state like go door to door. That's what I'd have to do. The name is just, Bomke's not well enough known, and I didn't have the money, unfortunately. You almost have to be a multi-millionaire in order to be successful in running for governor. At least the last two, that's the case. Were you done, ma'am? I'm
Yes,
sorry.
I am. Thank you.
A lot of the speakers in this series have talked about their leisure time in Old Springfield.
Yeah.
You didn't have a lot of leisure time,
No.
but I'm curious if you and your friends or family ever came into town, and if so, what did you do here?
Well, I mean, yes.
Besides knock on doors.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, when I grew up, the place to hang out was McDonald's on MacArthur. You would drive through there and Brazier, and then, what's the one?
Pop's Big Boy.
Pop's Big Boy, yeah, you would drive. So yes, you came into town a lot. Those were hot spots. But yeah, that's pretty much it. And the theaters, I don't remember them all now, but we did come to, but I was let off the farm on occasion, not very often, but on occasion.
Good.
And incidentally, Sally, my wife, taught at Chatham. When I met her, she was teaching at Chatham, Glenwood.
Did you ever have livestock?
We did, yeah. Our farm was typical of farms back in the 50s. We had dairy cattle. My father milked every morning, every night. We had chickens. My mother sold chickens and eggs to the local market. We had beef cattle, and we had hogs, and we had the grain operation, but it was a very small operation. And in the middle to the end of the 50s, the dairy industry became regulated, and it regulated my father out of the business. So we could no longer do that. I vividly remember him talking about the milk used to pay the bills, and the crops and everything else was just gravy. Well, that then had to pay the bills, and it got a little tight. Then the chicken industry, egg industry became regulated. There was a little store on Lawrence Street, right at Enos. Your mother used to go there because Nanny and I stole an apple one time. And we're sitting in the car, and your mother came out, we're laughing, we had this apple. Oh my gosh, when she found out what we'd done, we had to take it back in and apologize to the guy.
I stole a pack of gum from Iles, and she took me back in.
Yeah,
Criminals in
well,
the
good
family.
luck, good luck. Anyway, there was a little market there, and my mother used to sell eggs there. Well, she could no longer do that. And I tell the story, when I was a young boy, I was very shy, extremely shy. And I have relatives that tell me today that I was so shy they thought something was wrong with me. I had the same relative tell me that when I became a state senator, after all these years, we figured out we were right. There was something wrong with me. But my mother would take me, when she couldn't sell it to the store, we had all these eggs. I went door to door selling eggs. I can't imagine. Can you imagine buying eggs from some? Anyway, I'd sell them 3 and 4 dozens for $1, depending on how good a night it was. I was scared to death. I mean, I was shy. I prayed nobody to answer the door. And fortunately, we only had to do that a few weeks because my mother was able to build up a clientele when they came to the farm to get the eggs. Yes, ma'am.
You're related to Dorothy Bumgardner, aren't you?
Yes, but I'm not sure how.
Oh, I was going to ask you that.
Yeah, I'm not certain, but yes, I know the name, yes.
Do you know anything about her niece?
What would be Bumgardner?
She's married, I can't remember her name. She had some kind of disease or problem. She used to go to Germany.
Oh, you're not talking about Evelyn Thomas, okay.
No.
I thought maybe it was Ann Bomke.
I would recognize if I heard it.
Okay.
Well,
I could be Ann Bomke.
And.
Ann Bomke, a cousin who actually, Evelyn Thomas from Brant's Consolidated.
Yeah.
It was Glenn and Evelyn who started, that's my first cousin, Glenn and Evelyn, or my first cousin. Evelyn raised Ann.
Oh,
Yes.
really? Oh, I didn't realize that.
They had the money, I didn't. They've been very successful.
Left over, you might-
Can you tell us a little bit about your school? Like, was it a consolidated school? Did you
Yeah.
have,
Well,
how many in your class? and
oh,
grade
not
school?
many, not many. I went to Pleasant Plains, that's where our children went to school. In fact, it was the year before Farmingdale is where I went to grade school. But it only became Farmingdale Grade School halfway through 55, 56 was my first year. I went to first grade, we didn't have preschool or kindergarten or
Right.
anything. My sister actually went to, she was 4 years older than me, went to one-room schoolhouses.
Yeah, okay.
There's a cracknet school, do you know where that was, David?
Is that the one on Rafferton, or is that?
Yeah,
the one-
Rafferton Road,
Yeah.
Rafferton Road. You know how I got its name Crackneck? Somebody told me that, I don't know if
No.
it's true, but I'm gonna go with it. Supposedly, it's Crackneck School, there's a little bit of a curve in the road. Suppose if you took a horse and buggy too fast around that, you'd crack your neck. So they called it Crackneck School. But they were one-room schoolhouses. And when I went to Farmingdale, it was just 3 rooms and a cafeteria, as I recall.
So you're a charter member.
How many grades and 3 rooms?
There were 6 grades,
Okay.
yeah. A couple were doubled up.
Yeah, I
Obviously.
guess so. Yeah. And then high school?
High school went to Pleasant Plains. It was, I don't remember, I tell people I was in the top 35 of my class. I think there were only 35 of us.
I remember that. I was in the top 56.
So not very many in our class, graduating class. Now Sally had like 300 at Springfield, I think, didn't you? She probably was in the top 10.
My children went to Chatham, Ball Chatham. Where did you teach?
I taught at Ball Elementary most of the time.
During what period? They went to Ball Elementary. Then at that time, it was Glenwood Junior High School. Then where the middle school is now was the high school. And so I just wondered if you might have been there.
I started in '73 when I graduated from DeKalb, from
73.
Yes.
1973.
Well, we moved to rural Rochester in December of 73, and my kids went to Ball Elementary.
And that's where I taught. Of the 20 years I was there, 17 of them were at Ball and then 3 at Chatham.
Did you know like Carolyn Hartley and
Yes, I know that name.
And,
yes, I do.
Mrs. Skinner and Mr. Savage was the principal?
Yes, Mr. Savage came to my retirement party.
So who knows it?
We had such a great relationship. He greatest principal.
So your name then was?
Binkendorf.
Okay. Well, I'll tell my kids, I'll ask them.
When I
Okay.
got married, my students always had trouble pronouncing my name anyway. And then, so when I got married, they called me Mrs. Bomkedorf. Such a cute thing. And I said, charge out of that.
I heard what they called it when you weren't around. Oh my.
Well, I had a parent call and ask for me one time, and they thought she asked for Mrs. Bonkers.
Oh.
Yeah.
Larry mentioned that he used to fly a plane. I remember you called me once. You had to get some hours in or something, and I went with you. I don't know if you
Well,
remember
did you
that.
go with me?
I will.
Really?
You took me.
I don't remember that.
I do, because I remember when we were coming in, I could tell you looked a little nervous.
Did I?
Coming in the land, and I remember saying, Larry, I can't think of a better person to die with.
Oh, Sally can tell you some stories.
That's probably why I died with you, because she just said, I'm not going.
Unfortunately, she was pregnant with Natalie when we were flying, yes.
I don't want to spoil the party, but could you just tell us during your first or maybe your second campaign, what was a political issue that differentiated you from either your primary opponent or for your
But
general
I never
election?
had well, I did have a primary, but he got thrown off the ballot. But I don't, well, There weren't any real hot issues back then. So I don't remember. I honestly don't, but there was a difference. The only difference was I went to see people. That
What
was
did you
it.
say though? What did you say?
Oh, you know what? Here's the thing. When you're knocking on door, I know people are scared to death to do that when people come to me and say, how are you successful? What'd you do? Look, I don't know if it works today. I mean, there were many nights I'd be out walking 2 or 3 hours and I'd think, I wonder how many doors are knocked on when people actually vote. That was back, years ago. So maybe it doesn't work today, but quite honestly, I always said, Senator Larry Bomke, just in the neighborhood, if ever I can assist you, please let me know. They wanted to get rid of me as fast as I wanted to go. And so that was pretty much it, unless I mowed a lawn. I can't tell you, and I wish I had $1 for every time after I mowed that lady's lawn, I knock on a door and a person would say, hey, by the way, my lawn needs
Now, is it true you lived in an apartment building? You mentioned about a fire. For some reason, back in my mind, I think there was a fire in an apartment building where you had to jump out the 3rd floor window.
No, I didn't do that. But Sally and I lived in an apartment. She lived in an apartment and then she moved to a friend of mine and hers. They lived upstairs and I lived downstairs. It was cast. It was right over
Yeah, Nathan Cast. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, it burned down, but we had moved. We had built our house and were married by then.
For some reason, I heard that you jumped up
No.
a 3rd story window at that place. Danny, my brother, probably told me
Yeah,
that.
probably Danny.
Yeah.
No, I didn't do that. Not that I can remember anyway.
One last thing I'll just mention. I remember, you have to correct me if I get this story right or wrong, Larry's property butts up against our 80 acres.
Right.
And Mom told me this story, or told us, that you had called her saying, we're selling this, would you be interested, the Barringers, in buying 15 acres? And Dad said, no, I'm getting close to retirement. No,
I think I went over and talked to you.
Oh, that was okay.
I think so.
And they said no, and then Mom flipped on it, and she told Dad, she said, I'm really interested in that property, and I'm going to buy it. If you don't want to buy it, Floyd, I'm buying it. And then she called you maybe the next day or a few days later, and you'd already sold it. It was
I
already
don't
gone.
remember that. Well, it wasn't difficult to sell. I thought you were going to talk about when David had a guy that did the farming around there, Hank Summers. Hank Summers. And one of the problems we used to have is we had cattle, and they had cattle. We'd have a bull, and they'd have a bull, and that was a mess. They were fighting all the time and knocking the fence down, so we had to get rid of one of the bulls and just use one. And I don't know if you remember there being a gate between our property, just a little gate. That was the purpose of that gate, to let the bull back and forth.
Okay.
Little fence, yeah. And I also remember with Danny, I mean, what kids do, you don't think. What we were reading about your front of your brain doesn't mature to your 25. We were probably about, I don't know, 8 or 9 maybe. We had this great idea at your house, take toilet paper and spread it across the road to the cemetery and tie it to a tree. And we thought, oh, that would be funny. Somebody will come up to it and they'll see it. They'll come up to it and they'll see it and they'll slow down and then they'll find out it's toilet paper and they're going to be mad. That's not what happened. Earl Bomke, who's a cousin of mine, much older than me, come down the road, he locked his brakes, he could have wrecked his car. We saw that. And I remember, it scared the daylights out of us, it was stupid. Hank Barringer came down. He called Hank.
Frank Summer? You said Hank Barringer.
I'm sorry, Hank Summers. Hank Summers, yeah. Not Barringer. Came down, he said, hey boys, you know anybody put up, and he called it SHIT across the road? No, well, somebody almost wrecked their car, kind of keep an eye out for somebody doing that or something.
That'd be something you'd do.
Yeah, but that was, kids.
Were you ever interviewed by Colin Davis on
Yes.
oral history?
Yes.
Because I was involved in the legislative oral history
Yes.
project during an internship.
I think they got a tape of me someplace. Will they do the taping of it?
It would probably be in the presidential.
Yeah, nobody's ever going to look it up. But yeah, it's there. It's at the presidential. I agree.
And it was,
Is that it?
That is.
All right.
And next week, we're gonna have Sally Joe.
Oh, she's got a lot of things to do.
Thank you, Senator Bunting.
Yeah.
It was great.